Last night, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps fired over 250 Fattah hypersonic missiles in a single, overwhelming barrage. These unstoppable weapons, streaking through the sky at speeds of Mach 13 to Mach 15, nearly 18,500 kilometers per hour, tore through the defenses of the world's most powerful navy like a hot knife through butter. A United States aircraft carrier strike group operating in the Strait of Hormuz has been hit hard. Multiple reports confirm that one American supercarrier has been sunk, sent to the bottom of the narrow choke point that controls 1/5 of the planet's oil supply. Thick black smoke now rises from the waters where American naval supremacy once reigned unchallenged. Dozens of escort destroyers are reported damaged or fighting for survival as secondary explosions light up the night sky. This was no random strike. This was Iran's calculated, devastating response to America's aggressive blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. While Washington tried to strangle Iran's economy, Tehran answered with raw, hypersonic firepower. In just minutes, the Fattah missiles exposed the terrifying vulnerability of even the most advanced carrier battle groups. Aegis systems, SM-3 interceptors, and layered defenses, all overwhelmed by sheer speed, saturation, and maneuverability that no Western system was truly prepared to stop. Washington is in full panic mode. Emergency meetings are underway at the Pentagon and the White House, and the world is holding its breath. This is not just another escalation. This is a turning point. The era of unchallenged American naval dominance in the Middle East may have ended tonight in flames at the bottom of the Strait of Hormuz. How did Iran manage to coordinate and launch 250 Fattah hypersonic missiles in one devastating wave? What made these missiles so lethal that they penetrated the U.S. Navy's most advanced defenses and sank a supercarrier in the Strait of Hormuz? Why is Washington now in complete panic, and what desperate moves will the Pentagon make next? And most importantly, how does this single night accelerate the collapse of American dominance and reshape the new multipolar world order? All these critical questions will be answered in full detail. Before we dive deep into the shocking analysis, if you want to stay updated on the most intense developments in the Middle East conflict, hit the like button right now, subscribe to US Strategic Insight, and turn on notifications. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. Do you believe this is the beginning of the end for US naval supremacy? And tell us, where are you watching this video from right now? Ladies and gentlemen, what the world just witnessed in the skies over the Strait of Hormuz was nothing short of a military earthquake. In a single, breathtaking operation, Iran unleashed a massive salvo of 250 Fattah hypersonic missiles, turning the night into a blazing inferno of unstoppable firepower. This was not a limited strike or a warning shot. This was Iran's most ambitious and overwhelming counteroffensive to date. A true firestorm designed to shatter American and Israeli air defenses in one decisive blow. The Fattah series, particularly the advanced Fattah 1 and Fattah 2 variants, represents the cutting edge of Iranian missile technology. Developed by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, these hypersonic weapons are engineered to travel at terrifying speeds between Mach 13 and Mach 15. That translates to roughly 16,000 to 18,500 kilometers per hour, fast enough to cross vast distances in mere minutes while maintaining extreme maneuverability both inside and outside the Earth's atmosphere. What makes the Fattah truly nightmarish for any defender is its ability to glide and change direction unpredictably at hypersonic velocities. Unlike traditional ballistic missiles that follow a predictable arc, the Fattah's hypersonic glide vehicle can perform sharp maneuvers in pitch and yaw, evading interception attempts with frightening efficiency. Its low observable profile and agile flight path render conventional radar systems almost blind. Even the most advanced multi-layered defenses, Israel's Arrow 3 system, America's Patriot batteries, or the Aegis combat systems aboard U.S. warships, struggle to acquire, track, and engage a target moving at such velocities while constantly altering its trajectory. Iranian forces reportedly launched this barrage from multiple mobile transporter erector launcher units scattered across hardened sites deep inside Iranian territory. The sheer scale of 250 missiles launched in coordinated waves created a saturation effect that overwhelmed enemy sensors. Some missiles flew high-altitude trajectories before diving into the atmosphere at terminal speeds exceeding Mach 5, while others skimmed lower paths to exploit terrain and electronic jamming. This multi-axis approach ensured that defensive systems faced threats from several directions simultaneously, stretching their limited interceptor stocks to the breaking point. According to initial battlefield reports, the primary targets included key U.S. military installations along the Persian Gulf, forward operating bases supporting Israeli operations, and naval assets positioned near the critical choke point of the Strait of Hormuz. The Fattah's reported range of approximately 1,400 kilometers allowed Iranian commanders to strike with precision from well-protected rear areas, minimizing exposure to immediate retaliation. This barrage marks a dramatic shift in Iran's strategy. For months, Tehran had exercised calculated restraint, relying on proxies and measured responses. But after repeated strikes on its territory and the escalation around Bushehr, Iranian leadership apparently decided the time for patience had ended. The launch of 250 hypersonic missiles signals a move from defensive posturing to an aggressive, all-out counterstrike. It demonstrates not only technological maturity, but also the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' growing confidence in its arsenal. Military analysts watching the event in real time described the scene as apocalyptic. Radar screens across the region lit up with hundreds of fast-moving contacts. Interceptor missiles rose in desperate salvos, yet many failed to achieve lock-on as the Fattah vehicles executed their signature high-speed, evasive maneuvers. The sky filled with streaks of fire and contrails as the hypersonic weapons cut through the defenses like hot knives through butter. What stunned observers most was the speed and coordination of the attack. From the moment the first missiles left their launchers until impact, the entire operation unfolded in under 10 minutes in some sectors. This blistering tempo left little room for effective command and control responses from the opposing side. Communication networks reportedly experienced severe overload as commanders scrambled to assess the incoming threat and allocate limited defensive resources. This firestorm of Fattah missiles has fundamentally altered the balance of power in the air domain over the Gulf. It proved that Iran possesses the capability to project overwhelming force across one of the world's most strategically vital waterways. The psychological impact is equally significant. No longer can adversaries assume that advanced Western air defenses provide an impenetrable shield. The myth of absolute superiority has been challenged in spectacular fashion. As the smoke and plasma trails from the 250 Fattah launches begin to dissipate, one thing is crystal clear: Iran has crossed a new threshold in this conflict. The hypersonic era has arrived in the Middle East with devastating force, and the rules of engagement have changed forever. The world now waits with bated breath to see how Washington and Tel Aviv will respond to this unprecedented display of Iranian military reach and resolve. But the real shock was yet to come, because among the chaos of this hypersonic barrage, something even more catastrophic occurred in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz itself. As the sky above the Persian Gulf still burned with the fiery trails of the Fattah barrage, the real hammer fell not in the air, but upon the surface of the world's most vital maritime choke point. In one of the most devastating naval setbacks in modern American history, at least one U.S. aircraft carrier strike group suffered a catastrophic hit in the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz. Reports confirmed that a major surface combatant, widely identified as a Nimitz-class or Ford-class carrier, was struck by multiple hypersonic warheads and has been declared sunk or effectively destroyed, marking the first time in decades that the U.S. Navy has lost such a prized asset in direct combat. The timing could not have been more punishing. American carrier groups had positioned themselves aggressively near the entrance of the strait to enforce a blockade and project power against Iranian coastal defenses. These floating fortresses, protected by rings of guided missile destroyers, cruisers with Aegis combat systems, and layers of electronic warfare aircraft, were supposed to represent the ultimate expression of American naval invincibility. Yet the Fattah hypersonic vehicles proved otherwise. Traveling at speeds that compressed reaction times to mere seconds, several missiles penetrated the outer screen of escorts and slammed into the carrier's flight deck and superstructure with overwhelming kinetic and explosive force. What made this strike so lethal was the unique combination of the Fattah's terminal performance and the geography of Hormuz itself. The strait is barely 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, forcing large warships into predictable channels while limiting their ability to maneuver freely. Iranian forces, operating from mobile coastal batteries and offshore platforms, exploited this constriction perfectly. Some Fattah glide vehicles reportedly executed final high-G maneuvers at Mach 5 plus, approaching from unexpected angles and altitudes that overwhelmed the phased array radars of the escort ships. The carrier's own defensive systems, including the latest SM-6 interceptors and close-in weapon systems, were saturated by the sheer volume and velocity of incoming threats. Electronic jamming from Iranian assets further degraded sensor fusion across the battle group. Eyewitness accounts and initial satellite imagery painted a grim picture. Massive secondary explosions ripped through aircraft parked on the deck, fuel lines ignited in towering fireballs, and thick black smoke billowed hundreds of meters into the air. The carrier, once a mobile airfield capable of launching dozens of strike aircraft simultaneously, quickly lost propulsion and began listing as flooding spread through damaged compartments. Rescue operations faced immediate danger from follow-on Iranian attacks and the heavy maritime traffic that still transited the area. Hundreds of sailors are feared dead or missing, while the surviving escorts struggle to provide cover amid continued missile threats. This sinking delivers far more than a tactical loss. An aircraft carrier embodies decades of investment, advanced technology, and thousands of highly trained personnel. Its destruction sends shockwaves through every allied navy and every potential adversary watching from afar. For the first time in the hypersonic age, the U.S. Navy's crown jewel has been shown to be vulnerable in a high-intensity littoral environment. The psychological blow is immense. Sailors who once felt untouchable aboard these steel behemoths must now confront the reality that speed and maneuverability can trump layered defenses when the battlefield is tightly constrained. Strategically, the loss at Hormuz threatens to unravel America's entire posture in the Gulf. Without the carrier's air wing providing continuous combat air patrol and strike capability, U.S. forces lose critical overhead coverage for ground operations and maritime interdiction. Supply lines for forward-deployed troops become harder to protect, and the ability to rapidly reinforce allies in the region is severely compromised. More dangerously, the incident has turned the strait into a kill zone. Oil tankers now hesitate to transit. Mines and anti-ship missiles from Iranian Revolutionary Guard units add further layers of threat, and any remaining U.S. surface ships must operate under constant fear of additional hypersonic salvos. The blow also exposes deeper vulnerabilities in current naval doctrine. For years, American planners assumed that superior sensors, network warfare, and overwhelming firepower would always prevail. The Fattah attack has challenged that assumption by demonstrating how a determined regional power armed with relatively affordable hypersonic systems can impose unacceptable costs on a vastly more expensive fleet. The geography of Hormuz amplified every advantage Iran held: short reaction distances, coastal concealment, and the ability to coordinate strikes with land-based forces and fast attack boats. As rescue vessels race toward the burning wreckage and Pentagon spokesmen struggle to craft their first statements, one fact stands undeniable: the balance of naval power in the Persian Gulf has shifted dramatically in a single afternoon. The United States, long accustomed to commanding the seas without serious challenge, now faces a harsh new reality where even its most powerful symbols can be sunk by precision hypersonic fire in confined waters. The sinking of this carrier is not merely a military incident. It is a strategic earthquake that will force Washington to reconsider every assumption about power projection in the Middle East. But as the flames still rage on the water, the panic inside the White House and the Pentagon is only beginning to unfold. As the burning wreckage of the American carrier drifted in the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz, a different kind of firestorm erupted thousands of miles away inside the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. The news of a U.S. aircraft carrier sunk by Iranian hypersonic missiles triggered an unprecedented wave of panic that swept through the White House, the Pentagon, and the highest levels of the national security apparatus. For the first time in generations, the United States found itself confronting a direct, humiliating military reversal that threatened to unravel its entire strategic posture in the Middle East. Emergency alerts lit up secure communication lines within minutes of the strike. President Trump was pulled from a scheduled meeting and rushed into the Situation Room, where grim-faced generals and intelligence chiefs delivered the unfiltered damage assessment. Initial reports spoke of heavy casualties, loss of critical air assets, and a sudden collapse of naval dominance in one of the world's most important energy corridors. The atmosphere in the room was described by insiders as tense and fractured, with raised voices and conflicting recommendations filling the air. At the Pentagon, chaos reigned. Senior officers scrambled to activate contingency plans that had never been fully tested under real hypersonic attack conditions. Crisis teams worked frantically to reroute remaining naval forces, reassess air defense coverage across the Gulf, and prepare for potential follow-on Iranian strikes. Communication networks were overloaded as commanders demanded real-time updates from surviving ships and reconnaissance assets. Some officials openly questioned how the most advanced Navy on Earth could suffer such a blow in waters it had patrolled unchallenged for decades. The political pressure on the administration was immediate and intense. Hawks within the Republican Party and key congressional leaders demanded a swift and overwhelming retaliation, warning that any sign of weakness would embolden not only Iran, but also Russia and China. Meanwhile, more cautious voices inside the State Department and National Security Council urged restraint, highlighting the terrifying risk of rapid escalation into a broader regional war, or worse, a direct confrontation involving major powers. President Trump, who had campaigned on ending America's involvement in endless foreign conflicts, now faced the agonizing dilemma of balancing domestic promises with the harsh realities of superpower responsibility. Compounding the crisis was the economic dimension that hit Wall Street almost instantly. As news of the carrier sinking spread, oil futures spiked dramatically, sending shockwaves through global markets. Energy analysts warned of possible supply disruptions exceeding 20% of daily world production if the strait remained contested. Inside the White House, economic advisors painted dire scenarios of surging gasoline prices, inflationary pressure, and potential damage to the administration's approval ratings ahead of key midterm calculations. The intelligence community faced its own reckoning. Questions mounted about why warning signs of Iran's hypersonic readiness had not translated into more effective preemptive measures. Satellite imagery and signals intelligence had tracked increased activity at Iranian missile sites, yet the speed and scale of the 250 missile barrage still caught planners off guard. Fingers pointed in multiple directions between agencies, between military branches, and between political appointees and career professionals. The atmosphere grew increasingly toxic as each side sought to protect its own narrative. Perhaps most damaging was the psychological blow to American prestige. For years, Washington had projected an image of technological and military superiority that deterred challengers. The loss of a carrier in Hormuz shattered that perception in a single afternoon. Allies from Europe to Asia began quietly reassessing their reliance on American security guarantees, while adversaries watched with calculated interest. Diplomatic cables flooded in from embassies across the Gulf, reporting nervous conversations with local leaders who feared being caught in the crossfire of a spiraling conflict. Inside the Situation Room, the debate turned increasingly heated. Some advocated immediate airstrikes on Iranian missile infrastructure and naval bases, arguing that failure to respond decisively would invite further aggression. Others warned that such actions could trigger a full-scale closure of the strait, massive refugee flows, and retaliatory attacks on U.S. bases stretching from Qatar to Jordan. The president listened intently, his usual confidence tempered by the gravity of the moment. Every option carried enormous risk, military, economic, and political. As night fell over Washington, the sense of controlled panic deepened. Staffers moved between meetings with hurried steps and lowered voices. Secure phones rang nonstop. The administration found itself trapped between the need to project strength abroad and the fear of unleashing forces it could no longer fully control. The sinking of the carrier had exposed vulnerabilities that no amount of briefing papers or war games had adequately prepared for. The hours following the strike revealed a superpower suddenly forced to confront its own limits. The United States, long accustomed to dictating the tempo of conflict in the region, now found itself reacting to events driven by an adversary it had underestimated. The panic in Washington was not merely about one lost ship. It was about the sudden realization that the old rules of engagement no longer applied in the age of hypersonic warfare. Yet, even as the crisis deepened in the White House and Pentagon, the global consequences were only beginning to unfold. The economic and strategic ripples from the sinking at Hormuz were spreading far beyond the battlefield, threatening to reshape energy markets, international alliances, and the future balance of power across the Middle East and beyond. While Washington grappled with the immediate military and political fallout, the true magnitude of the crisis began to reverberate across the planet. The sinking at Hormuz had transformed the narrow strait into a blazing energy inferno, choking off one of the most critical arteries of the global economy. What started as a naval confrontation rapidly evolved into a worldwide economic catastrophe with ripple effects that no nation could escape. The Strait of Hormuz normally carries approximately 1/5 of the world's seaborne oil and liquefied natural gas. That equates to roughly 20 million barrels of petroleum products passing through its waters every single day, destined primarily for energy-hungry economies in Asia, Europe, and beyond. In the hours following the hypersonic strike and the carrier's destruction, tanker traffic ground to a near standstill. Major shipping companies issued urgent orders to divert vessels, while insurance premiums for any ship brave enough to approach the area skyrocketed beyond feasible levels. Satellite tracking showed hundreds of tankers stranded or reversing course, creating floating bottlenecks that further paralyzed the flow of energy. Oil markets reacted with fury. Brent crude, the international benchmark, surged past $130 per barrel within the first trading session, with spot prices for immediate delivery in Europe touching record highs near $150. West Texas Intermediate followed a similar trajectory, climbing relentlessly as traders priced in prolonged disruption. This was not a modest spike. It represented the largest single-day energy shock in modern history, dwarfing previous crises in scale and speed. Analysts warn that if the strait remained contested for even a few more weeks, prices could test $160 or higher, triggering inflationary pressures not seen since the 1970s oil embargoes. The pain spread far beyond the trading floors. Asian economies, which rely most heavily on Persian Gulf crude, face the harshest immediate blow. China, India, Japan, and South Korea, collectively the largest importers of Middle Eastern oil, scrambled to secure alternative supplies that simply did not exist in sufficient volume. Factories began cutting shifts. Airlines grounded flights, and governments dipped into strategic reserves that were never designed for such a sustained shortfall. In Europe, already vulnerable after years of energy uncertainty, the situation turned critical. Chemical plants in Germany and fertilizer producers across the continent announced temporary shutdowns as feedstock costs became prohibitive. Households braced for another brutal winter of soaring heating bills. The United States, though less directly dependent on Hormuz oil for its own consumption, could not insulate itself from the storm. Higher energy prices fed instantly into transportation, manufacturing, and agriculture. Truckers faced doubled fuel costs. Grocery prices climbed as refrigeration and transport expenses mounted, and airline tickets became noticeably more expensive almost overnight. The Federal Reserve found itself in an impossible position, fighting inflation that the energy shock had reignited, while trying to support growth already weakened by global uncertainty. President Trump's economic team watched nervously as consumer confidence indicators plunged and stock markets swung wildly. Beyond crude oil, the natural gas dimension amplified the damage. Liquefied natural gas shipments that normally transit the strait were also disrupted, tightening supplies for power generation and industrial use in multiple regions. European nations, still recovering from earlier energy volatility, saw wholesale gas prices jump by more than 50% in a matter of days. This cascading effect hit everything from electricity bills to the production of plastics, pharmaceuticals, and food packaging. The crisis exposed the fragility of just-in-time global supply chains. With energy costs rising so sharply, manufacturers worldwide began revising forecasts downward. Automotive plants in Europe and Asia delayed production lines due to higher component and logistics expenses. Agricultural output faced threats as fertilizer prices heavily tied to natural gas soared, raising fears of reduced crop yields and future food shortages. Developing economies in Africa and Latin America, already struggling with debt burdens, watched helplessly as imported fuel costs drained precious foreign reserves. Geopolitically, the energy hellfire reshaped alliances and rivalries. Nations that had quietly depended on American security guarantees in the Gulf now questioned Washington's ability to keep vital sea lanes open. Some Gulf Arab states accelerated diversification efforts, while others explored discreet back-channel talks to de-escalate. Meanwhile, countries with alternative energy routes or domestic production watched their relative positions strengthen. Russia and other non-OPEC producers saw windfall revenues from elevated prices even as they navigated their own complex relationships in the conflict. Environmental and humanitarian concerns added another layer of tragedy. The potential for oil spills from damaged tankers or offshore infrastructure loomed large, threatening fragile marine ecosystems in the Gulf. Refugee flows and regional instability threatened to intensify if economic hardship deepened, creating secondary crises that could stretch international aid systems to their limits. As the flames continued to rise over the waters of Hormuz, the world confronted a harsh truth. In the modern era, energy is not merely a commodity, it is the lifeblood of civilization. Disrupting that flow at its narrowest point has unleashed a global economic contagion whose full consequences may take months or even years to fully materialize. The sinking of a single carrier had ignited far more than naval conflict. It had set ablaze the foundations of the international economic order. The energy inferno in Hormuz now forces every capital on Earth to recalculate its priorities. Nations must weigh military calculations against economic survival, short-term retaliation against long-term stability. As markets tremble and governments scramble, one reality stands clear. The old assumptions about secure energy flows and unchallenged maritime dominance have been consigned to history. A new, more dangerous chapter in global energy geopolitics has begun. As the energy inferno continues to rage across the Strait of Hormuz, a profound transformation is taking place on the grand chessboard of global power. The 250 Fattah hypersonic missiles and the sinking of an American carrier have not merely damaged ships and disrupted markets. They have shattered long-standing assumptions about military superiority and redrawn the paired strategic map of the Middle East and beyond. For decades, the United States positioned itself as the undisputed arbiter of security in the Persian Gulf, its carrier strike groups serving as floating symbols of unchallenged dominance. That era appears to be ending. The successful Iranian strike has exposed critical vulnerabilities in American power projection, forcing Washington to confront a future where forward-deployed naval assets can no longer guarantee control over vital sea lanes. The balance that once favored overwhelming technological and financial superiority is giving way to a more complex reality where geography, speed, and asymmetric capabilities carry equal weight. Iran has emerged from this confrontation with significantly enhanced strategic stature. What began as a defensive posture has evolved into a demonstration of offensive reach and resolve. By mastering hypersonic technology and coordinating strikes in one of the world's most congested maritime choke points, Tehran has proven it can impose prohibitive costs on a superpower. This new reality strengthens Iran's hand in any future negotiations and bolsters its influence among regional actors who previously viewed it as vulnerable. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has sent an unmistakable message. Iran is prepared to defend its core interests with high-impact, high-precision tools that bypass traditional defensive shields. Meanwhile, traditional alliances are being quietly reassessed. Gulf Arab states, long reliant on American protection, now face uncomfortable questions about the reliability of extended security guarantees. Some are already exploring hedging strategies, deepening ties with alternative partners, while maintaining necessary relations with Washington. European capitals, reeling from energy price shocks, are urging diplomatic off-ramps rather than further military escalation. Even close allies are beginning to calculate the economic price of prolonged confrontation. Russia and China watch these developments with calculated interest. Moscow benefits indirectly from elevated energy prices that strengthen its own export revenues, while Beijing gains leverage as a major consumer seeking stable alternative supply routes. Both powers see an opportunity in the shifting dynamics, a world moving away from unipolar dominance toward a more multipolar order where regional players like Iran can carve out greater autonomy. The real question now is not who possesses the most expensive weapons, but who possesses the greater endurance and clearer strategic vision. The United States retains formidable conventional power and the ability to sustain long-term pressure if it chooses. However, domestic political divisions, economic sensitivities, and the high cost of prolonged conflict may limit its appetite for total escalation. Iran, though facing severe sanctions and internal challenges, has demonstrated remarkable resilience and the willingness to absorb risks that others might avoid. This new chessboard favors those who can blend military innovation with economic staying power and diplomatic flexibility. The Fattah strike has accelerated the transition toward a multipolar Middle East, where no single actor can dictate terms without paying a heavy price. Future conflicts in the region will likely be decided less by raw firepower and more by the ability to control key choke points, maintain domestic cohesion, and navigate complex international coalitions. As smoke still rises from the waters of Hormuz, the world stands at a strategic crossroads. The old rules of engagement have been rewritten in fire and hypersonic speed. Nations that adapt quickly to this new reality, those that recognize the limits of traditional power while mastering emerging technologies and economic leverage, will shape the coming era. Those that cling to outdated assumptions risk being left behind in the rapidly evolving geopolitical landscape. The Fattah barrage did not end the conflict, but it has decisively changed its character. The question of who will ultimately prevail remains open, yet one outcome is already certain. The Middle East that emerges from this crisis will look dramatically different from the one that existed before the missiles flew. As the flames over the Strait of Hormuz continue to cast long shadows across the globe, one truth stands undeniable. The world has entered a dangerous new chapter. The launch of 250 Fattah hypersonic missiles and the sinking of a U.S. aircraft carrier have shattered old certainties and accelerated the shift toward a multipolar reality in the Middle East. This conflict has exposed the limits of traditional power projection and the rising influence of asymmetric capabilities in modern warfare. Nations that once relied solely on technological superiority must now navigate a battlefield where geography, speed, and strategic resolve can outweigh sheer military spending. The coming days and weeks will determine whether Washington chooses escalation or de-escalation, whether Iran consolidates its gains or faces overwhelming counterpressure, and whether global energy markets stabilize or descend further into turmoil. What remains certain is that the balance of power in the region has been permanently altered. Ladies and gentlemen, the storm unleashed by the Fattah barrage is far from over. The Middle East is being reshaped before our eyes, and its consequences will touch every corner of the planet. If you found this analysis valuable, please hit the like button, subscribe to US Strategic Insight, and turn on notifications so you never miss our in-depth updates on these critical developments. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Who do you believe will ultimately prevail in this high-stakes confrontation? Thank you for reading, stay vigilant, and we will see you in the next video as this historic chapter continues to unfold.